let's get on to the questions. As I said, the questioner gets a chance to come back, and we're going to be very tight on the amount of time each candidate can answer the questions. I think about a minute and a half is probably a reasonable amount of time to enable the flow to flow. Clive Petra.
Okay, to each of the candidates, how important do you think it is to always tell the truth in politics?
Lucy.
I think it's very important.
I think that's it. Pippa.
To be absolutely honest, I think we have to be truthful. I think there may be times when you cannot tell the full truth, but you should definitely honour the principle. And so I'm not going to give a glib response saying absolute truth in every single situation, but honesty is one of the values that I absolutely cherish.
Edmund.
I don't think there is anything in life that makes my lip curl faster than the sense that I'm being lied to. I don't do it to others, and I really don't like it if they do it to me.
James.
Sorry, the microphone keeps sinking. Over recent times, primarily over this last decade, the truth has sadly lost its value in politics. And we see that in the likes of Boris Johnson, we see that in the likes of Donald Trump, and we saw it firsthand during the 2016 EU referendum campaign. If we want politics back to the place it used to be, where it meant something, we need to challenge lies head on when we hear them. And we need to hold our media to account for not always challenging lies when they hear them.
Thank you very much indeed. Clive, did you hear the truth?
Well, I hope I did. It's difficult to tell in these days.
Has anybody else heard a lie tonight yet?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the EU bypass, because I believe that was planning commission in 2014.
Well, it's against the rules for you to ask a question because that wasn't part of the programme, but it's an interesting observation. I'll allow a few of those, but well, we're at a Baptist church. They're a lot more liberal about this. Okay, Kathy English, are you here? Would you like to ask a question?
Who do you consider to be the most deprived group of people in the UK, and what would you do to help them?
Deprivation. Let's start with Edmund.
We've heard quite a bit recently about the increase in people who are homeless and sleeping rough. I think if you have to sleep on the street or in a cardboard box, that's pretty much the limit of deprivation.
And Pippa?
I think our definition of deprived has had to enlarge so much because there are so many people now who are facing in-work poverty, homelessness, food banks and fuel poverty. In Cambridgeshire at the moment, would you call these the most deprived? 33,000 households will be facing fuel poverty this winter in Cambridgeshire, and that is the highest amount in the country. So the Liberal Democrats will root out the causes of that poverty and deprivation, but I think we need to look really beyond just one group. We have to look across this group. And mental health is also spiralling people into the most vulnerable situation, beyond deprivation, the most vulnerable situation they've ever been.
Okay. Lucy, the most deprived group, and what would you do to improve the lot?
Well, I agree with what other members of the panel have said, both in relation to mental health and homelessness. But I'd like to touch on two other categories of people. I think social mobility is fundamentally important, because I think if you give people who don't have a good start in life, don't necessarily come from the right background, I think if you give them the skills and the opportunity to succeed, you are doing a great service to society. I mentioned the opportunity area, which was one of the reasons I lobbied so hard to try and improve. Did you know East Cambridgeshire, at the time we got the opportunity area funding, was the 14th worst for social mobility in the country. That's an area that is so close to Cambridge. And so that is really important to improve social mobility. And the second category I would mention, just because I happen at the moment to be the prisons minister, I think that it's really important that we try and help people who have gone down the wrong path in life. Unfortunately, people who are in prison, society has sometimes failed them, first of all. The people who offend and go into prison come from, unfortunately, from care, often have dropped out of school, and I think we do absolutely need to put their lives back on track. And as a government, we have tried to do that in a number of ways, through education, through ensuring that they get accommodation when they come out of prison, and by ensuring that they don't take drugs when they're in prison, which often leads to further crime. So I think there are whole different aspects of society, different parts of society that we need to support, and I think we've heard a number of those on the panel.
James.
If we're talking about deprivation, then we absolutely have to talk about the fact that Britain now has a record level of child poverty. We are the 5th richest nation on earth. It is a national shame that this is the case. And that's because of a broken welfare and benefits system, collapsing public services, unaffordable housing, and an unregulated rented sector. Ills we would set right from day one in a Labour government.
Kathy, did you hear anything there that you feel helped you with your question?
Yes, but none of you mentioned the worst group were those who have immigration status, who can't work, who can't get property, but they can't get home because they haven't got a passport and they haven't got a fare.
People who are in traffic?
People who've been trafficked or failed asylum seekers who are just stuck in limbo and for years.
Well, I can concur with that because I've been fighting a case for 3 years now about a young Bangladeshi who is in that situation. We managed to get him out of Feltham, but I've been to 3 hearings, given evidence on 3 occasions, been to London many times, and it's the inability. He gets £26 a week. What is he to do apart from go and work on the black economy, which is the thing that got him into trouble in the first place? So, yeah, it's an interesting point. I will intervene if I think it's helpful or interesting. But let's move on to the next question. John Bald. Hello.
How would the candidates help young people and encourage them to vote?
James, how would you help young people and persuade them to vote for you?
I think young people have been a forgotten and ignored group for too long by politicians. If we look at the kind of offers parties have made to win votes, let's say, at the last 2 or 3 elections, so much is aimed at older adults and older people in our society. And I think at least Labour are recognising this. We will bring in a £10 minimum wage for all ages. The current minimum wage has an age cut-off for it. We will abolish tuition fees, opening up education as a free right to everybody. And we will tackle the housing crisis. It would take a young person earning the government's current national living wage over 30 years to save for a deposit in this constituency, which is crazy. So if we want young people to engage in politics, we, the political parties, have to offer them something and listen to what they want.
Okay. Edwin, how are you going to help young people?
If you mean, it depends on the age group you're talking about, of course, but if you mean people who are of student age, then certainly I think that looking at the student loan system and at the very least zero interest loans, I think should be there. Whether I would be in any position to promise abolishing tuition fees altogether, I rather doubt. I think also proper apprenticeship schemes are things that should be encouraged. The housing question is a much bigger one, I feel, and I'm sure that that will come up in a question somewhere later, and I have things to say about it. The main thing I'd do, though, to help young people and persuade them to vote for me is actually simply to talk to them. One of the things that I did do coming late to this whole game was to set up a campaign email, and I have had some rather interesting email conversations with young people who have quite reasonably sent in their questions. And whether or not I have persuaded those people in my responses, I don't know, but I hope so.
Okay, Lucy. Oh yeah, feel free to come.
Well, there's so much that we should be offering young people who are obviously our future, but I think there's probably three key things. The first is we need to ensure that when they want to buy a home, there is a home for them. And over the last that depends on a number of things, and over the last 5 years we've built 1 million more homes. We've also helped more people onto the property market by reducing stamp duty for first-time buyers, by the Help to Buy ISA, and a number of, and also the Help to Buy scheme, as well as the right to buy in relation to your council home. So getting a home is really important. Getting a job is fundamental. Getting a job is crucial to people's well-being, as well as their own financial stability, as well as contributing to the economy more broadly. And every day we have helped support, as the government, 1,000 new jobs come into this country. And by getting a job, that puts you on the right start. We have the lowest levels of unemployment on record. And not only that, people are getting paid more than they have done before. But the third thing that's really important is that you have hope for the future, that we live in a positive environment. And I think at the moment, we need to bring our country together. We need to have a tolerant society. And I think we need to ensure that we move to the next stage of our future, where we have positivity, where we can focus on things that matter to people. That's housing, that's education, that's the NHS. We've been in a little bit of a paralysis over the last few years, with a lot of business uncertainty, and I think we need to move on to hope for the future.
I think I'd let their voice be heard, and they want to work, travel, live and love across Europe, and so I would let them do that. And hear them on the climate emergency, hear them and act, because they say they're not being listened to, so we should act on the climate emergency. And then closer to home, they need the best start in life in terms of education, and they at least need to be able to have schools that can open 5 full days a week. And then in terms of housing, what we're offering as the Liberal Democrats is that they would have government-backed loans for the under-30s to be able to get their first step on foot on that property ladder.
Those calculators are working really hard in this room. John, how did that come over to you?
I think there were points of interest in all candidates' answers. I think we're dealing with a situation which has grown up over several decades. We should not have been allowed to grow up. I do agree that the tuition fee issue needs to be addressed. I see it as a brains tax, and I think we need to be encouraging brains and not taxing them. But there are points that everyone has made that actually give me some confidence that this is going to be moved up the agenda.
Thank you very much. Is John 902? Right, John 902, you've submitted several questions. We rather like the first one, where we have endured, and the reason is because these lot have been far too nice to each other, and this might just move a little bit.
So we've endured 9 years of austerity, but I would say that is due to New Labour's legacy. Remember, they left us a nice note of there being nothing left in the Treasury. and so
And a global crash.
and so that was New Labour, and that was New Labour. Current Labour is proposing vastly more spending. The Liberals are also proposing vastly more spending. Aren't we just going to take us all to oblivion?
Okay. Right, if you didn't hear all of that, basically, we were left, the Tories were left a mess. Everybody's promised everything. His calculator has expired, trying to work out all the promises that people have made us. So the only person on the panel, so we will start with him, who hasn't, we can't go back at him if he doesn't deliver the promises because he's a party of one. So, Edmund, what have you promised?
I haven't promised anything except some 4 rather simple things, and I haven't promised to spend anybody's money. One of the things that people tend to forget is that the government doesn't actually have any money of its own. It has to raise that money from taxation or occasionally borrowing, and historically Labour has been pretty good at that. What it hasn't been good at is paying it back again. So I'm actually quite wary of big spending promises, because it is basically bribing people with their own money.
Well, you're a bit of a bad boy, they reckon. So what do you do for Labour in the last administration?
Yes, I know. I feel this question is kind of directed a little bit towards me more so, but fair enough. Look, let's be clear. In 2008, there was a global financial crisis. It started in America when their mortgage markets collapsed. It spread across the oceans and hit nearly every developed nation on Earth. In Britain, we were particularly hard hit because our economy is built around financial services, banking, insurance, etc. An area massively deregulated by the Tories in the 1980s. That ushered in an era of austerity, which we now know was a smokescreen to cut public services. Because, let's be clear, debt and deficit are not the same thing. Deficit is the difference between the money coming in and the money going out. Debt is how much you owe. And the amount of debt this country had when the Tories took power in 2010 was 1 trillion. It's now 1.7 trillion. And how will we pay for our promises? It's very simple. Up to £25 billion a year is lost through tax evasion and tax avoidance by billionaires, tax dodgers, multinational corporations and the rest. This Labour government will be the first to stand up to them and say, no more. That is our money. All of us work hard and pay our taxes. Why should the billionaires and the multinationals be any different? And we will invest that money back where it belongs, into our public services.
I think that's a good place to start. We've had a
Sorry,
fairly,
yes.
we've had a fairly good, so let's explain whether they go to Pip. Well, Pip, your part was part of a coalition that, you know, played around with the economy for a few years. So, how do you see things now? What promises are you coming up with?
Well, I'm just surprised that there are magic money trees on both sides suddenly appearing. The Liberal Democrats worked together with the Institute of Fiscal Studies to find out exactly what Brexit is costing us already, what we're losing already in terms of investment and business rates, and who is losing out. And it is calculated what we call the Remain bonus. That if we just stop it now, we get it done by stopping it now, there will be a 50 billion Remain bonus from increased economic growth, from the business rates that would come in from that, and from increased taxes. The IFS told us that was cautious. They're looking at 80 billion. We are looking in the face at the loss of 80 billion. We would also raise taxes. We are looking at 1 penny in a pound for the NHS, and we've done multiple soundings of this across the country, and everybody is prepared to put a penny in a pound on income tax for ring-fenced additional funding long-term for the NHS that will deal with social care and mental health as well. So we're not looking at magic money trees, we're looking at the money that is there now and with some additional tax too. And Brexit is about financial deregulation and tax avoidance.
Lucy, it's inconceivable that you would promise to spend us all into oblivion, isn't it?
I should say at the beginning, Claire mentioned that we'd all made a pledge, and we have all made a pledge, and I'm not madly keen on negative campaigning. I always like to say what we will do, what I have done, because I think you should judge us all on what we have done. But I'm going to answer the question because it was put, and I think that we have to answer the question. So Labour have overspent. Labour always overspends, and leaves us to tidy up the mess. Labour always leaves us with unemployment higher than it was when they took office. We had some difficult years. We, the Conservative Party, the coalition, were blamed for years of austerity, but we had to take some difficult decisions because of the financial mess that we found ourselves in. We didn't want to come into office, and we never want to come into office cutting public services, because we, like others, like to support those who can't help themselves. But we cannot run a government where we spend too much. And in Labour's manifesto, they've offered to spend 1.2 trillion, which will result in 12 new tax rises. Pippa mentioned the Lib Dems, and that money was all identified by the IFS as existing, when in fact Layla Moran admitted that the Lib Dems' prediction was based on a range of economic forecasts, and the IFS has said that although the Lib Dems used their forecast, it couldn't predict the overall growth rate and the total money saved from remaining in the EU with any certainty. There is a little bit of money because of the steps that we have taken as a government. There is some money for more spending on public services, and we have committed to prioritise a number of things that we think are incredibly important. One of those is the NHS. So by the end of the next Parliament, we will have increased spending on the NHS by 29%. We've also committed to spending on education and on policing, as well as some other matters, but those are our three key pledges. NHS, education.
It's an interesting phrase. Everybody uses it at the end of the next Parliament, and I think we've had 4 Parliaments in the last 5 years, very short-term Parliaments, despite the act of fixed-term Parliaments. John, 902. How comfortable were you with all of that?
I do like good fiscal policy, so prudence is always a good thing. I don't think Labour will show any signs of prudence in their spending. They're just going to send us to oblivion almost certainly. I think the Liberals are very close in wanting to take us in the same direction with 60 odd billion per year plan. It's a very modest 3 or so billion, whatever it is currently, from the Conservatives. So I think that looks much more prudent on my side.
Okay, very good.
Why not financial impact studies on Brexit?
Some very interesting thoughts there. Thank you very much, John. Let's move on. If anybody's expecting a confrontation or debate on Brexit, it's coming up, but of all the 50-odd questions, there wasn't a single question on Brexit. Mark Dawson, you have several questions, Mark. We like the one about local roads, if you would, but you can do that, and then you can do the other one about the Amy waste as well. Could we have both? Because we could just, they're both about local issues, basically.
Yes, okay. Our local roads are full of potholes and barely visible markings, so they desperately need more investment, not just for the A10 and trunk roads going into Cambridge. So what would you do to improve community roads?
Okay. Lucy.
We have already committed to, I think Cambridge has got about £6 million, but I'd have to get back to the exact figure. But we've already got a significant amount that's already committed, nothing to do with the election, to potholes. And there is a programme by which if you identify a pothole, you can tell the county council, and they do them. You can also write to your MP, and that speeds up the process as well. There is also a big commitment in relation to infrastructure, because infrastructure is not just about the A10 and the major chunk roads. And there is a commitment in our manifesto more broadly on roads, as well as on buses and a number of other important things in relation to travelling around.
Okay, Pippa.
Okay. Potholes are bad, and they're very, very dangerous also for cyclists, as well as for car owners. I'm now in the district council. I was elected last year, and I understand the difference between district and county council responsibilities, and so we've looked into this. The county council has run down its funding on repairs and maintenance of the roads that you're talking about. There is no more money for that. And from 2020, there will be no more central government grants to local authorities. So this is a really serious issue that we're looking at, because that's a county council responsibility, as Lucy has said. So I think what we have to look at is how do we get better transport for all, and it's not about spending hundreds more on new roads than on our public transport in the end, and having that as a better possibility. And the Liberal Democrats will invest in public transport. And at the local district council, what we're already doing is making sure that for the first time now, you bake in the public transport before the first house is built, to ensure that actually the roads that you have serve for cycling, for walking, and for the buses, and for the rail. And that's the way, the future that I think we have to go.
James.
I'm sure we've all experienced the county website where you can report a pothole. Reporting it is one thing, seeing it repaired is another thing altogether. But that is not the fault of the county council, who have the responsibility of highways. It's the fault of austerity cuts that have taken 50p in the pound out of council funding from government since 2010. No wonder our councils cannot deliver even basic services now. They are understaffed, underfunded, and struggling to manage as is. And if we continue down this path, there'll be a lot worse things than potholes to worry about. But in addition to fixing our roads, by returning that funding back to our councils, Labour will also nationalise our buses and trains, so we'll have a proper service. Not one run on profit, where bus companies decide, well, we're not going to run a bus through your village because there's no money to be made. Or rip-off train companies that put up fares every year well above inflation. The solution to transport is investment and in nationalisation and running services for the benefit of people, not profit.
Well, I thought the question at first was about potholes, which I was going to give a short and sweet answer to, which was fill them in. But it seems to have broadened out. Can you remind me what the question was, actually, John?
Well, the answer was to write to your MP, because that will speed it up. I mean, I've written that down, and I'm going to have that tattooed on my and will our local roads get the investment they need, and not just the A10? So we're on roads, not on railways or bicycles.
All right. Well, there are two roads I really avoid whenever I can. One of them is the A10, and the other one's the A14. Neither of which seem to me to be fit for purpose, and I've noticed that a lot of other people do too. So there's a lot of use of minor roads, and these great big highways provided for us don't get used because they don't have the capacity. Beyond that, I'm a fan of public transport. I've noticed, we know for sure that the bus services in the constituency we're talking about are dire. The prices are extremely high, the journey times are very long. When our teenage children want to go places, basically mum and dad end up as the chauffeur, because the bus is really not much of an option. So I'm a fan of public transport. I don't quite know how you improve the scheduling of buses, though, because
but I do.
You do. Well, that's it. I think the answering my question.
Well, I mean, I'll answer for everybody, because somebody mentioned earlier about the county council being responsible, but what is meeting at the moment, the Combined Authority Bus Transport Review Group. So all go along to that, pop all your questions and everything else, and you'll be able to write to the Mayor as well as the MP, and they'll all get done with very quickly.
I think somebody needs to invent an Uber for buses.
Well, it's the most radical idea to come from this meeting, isn't it? Mark, you sit there absolutely stunned by the eloquency of the replies, but let's, without going into too much detail about what you feel about the answers, can we just have your second question, because that's a much quicker one to get some response to. But answer what you think about the responses, and then we'll have your second question quite quickly.
Yeah, it's heartening to hear more about the focus on alternative forms of transport.
Yeah, we didn't really get into that. But, let's see your second question.
Okay. The second question was about the proposed incinerator just off the road. I think maybe Virtue's handled that.
Well, we'll ask everybody very quickly. Where do you stand on the proposed Amy waste incinerator near Waterbeach? That's your second question, Mark. Let's start with you, Jack. Quickly, quick answer.
Yes, I'm completely opposed to it. It's dangerous, unneeded, and it is simply a cash cow for a private company who want to increase the value of their site when they sell up.
Let's see if the applause continues. Pippa.
Yeah, as you know, I made a written submission and then I made a spoken submission publicly to the inquiry. So I oppose this, and it should definitely not be a commercial, profit-based enterprise here in Waterbeach, or anywhere in that matter, I would say. The problem is, it's not this easy. The problem is our waste. We've got 7 to 8 years left of landfill in this area. So we can't anymore use developing countries as our dumping grounds, because they've said no.
The question was, where do you stand on the Amy waste incinerator?
On the Amy waste incinerator, I've opposed it. There should, if we can get our recycling rates down to up to 67% in the UK, there is no need for any more incinerators.
Thank you.
But we need better air quality regulation by the government, which is not regulating any incinerators properly in the country.
This was already explained earlier, but just for the benefit, explain where you are on that Amy waste incinerator.
I oppose it. I have opposed it. Some residents contacted me, the Action Group, some time ago, over a year ago, and I met with them and they explained why they opposed it. And because of the local objections, I opposed it at the first stage in writing on more than one occasion when the application was made. I opposed it in writing again when the appeal was made. I spoke at the inquiry a couple of weeks ago and will continue to oppose it so long as this process continues.
It doesn't sound like Waterbeach is a good place for it, but I do think that we do need to be incinerating waste, and particularly things like plastic waste, and that's the option of exporting them and then it doesn't go where it should do and ends up in the oceans, I think is not something that should be allowed to continue. There's also the question, though, of energy recovery. You can get an awful lot of energy back from the combustible wastes. I did some estimates on that quite recently, and a surprising proportion of the country's electricity needs might actually be derived from actually burning the wastes that are not recyclable. But that, of course, depends on the question of siting, and that's really a regular planning matter, and it doesn't feel to me like Waterbeach is the right place. You probably need it near an electrical substation if you're going to do that seriously.
Okay.